So, yes, we're going to talk security. Guess what? I'm not going to talk 802.11ax. I don't really care if the horse is dead or not dead or anything. It's still yet to be determined what's going to happen with that. So, we're going to talk security. And I've just gotten done this entire weekend speaking and doing the training for the CWSP. And I found out this morning that one of my students passed. So, that's really awesome. I think that means that I actually did something right over the weekend other than just hang out. So, yeah, more people in the world. So, who am I? My name is Blake Krone. Those of you that do not know who I am, I do a lot in the wireless community, a lot in the wireless industry. I may look young, it's because I shaved before I came here this weekend, but I've been around wireless since '99. So when Tom brought out the UFO this morning, I was like, oh yeah, that brings back memories. I remember when I would do wireless by setting that into a iMac, or the shell that had an iMac as well, and that was our wireless for the lobby areas or the outside area of lecture halls, and that's what we did. And we're like, this is really cool, this is amazing. So I speak, I teach, CCIE Wireless, and I'm on the council, CWNP Board of Advisors. Some of you may recognize me from those aspects of it, but I also do a podcast as well, and you can find me on Twitter where I sometimes ramble and sometimes put out some interesting things in there. So I wanted to start this off by kind of helping you understand the reality of what we live in. So if we think about security and we try to figure out what is it that we live in this world and what's going on, when we look at the reality of security, it's really about a couple of questions here. And the first one is the what ifs. Now we can play what ifs all day long in every single facet of our lives. Everything that we do through, we play what ifs of what if this happens, what if this happens, what if I do this and then can I get this? If I get my CWNP, am I going to get that big, huge raise that I always wanted to have? Right? That's our goal and what we're doing for the wireless side of things. So when we look at security, the question that people always ask is, what happens if I'm compromised? If I'm compromised, what is the impact of that? Does that cost me millions? Does it cost me potential users? You think about Facebook and their recent data breach, how many people immediately went and shut down their Facebook accounts because they're just looking at it as, I'm freely giving every single piece of information about me away to an organization that could potentially sell or hand over that information. So these data leaks, they're extremely important, and everybody is always asking that what if question. But that what if is not the right question. The more appropriate question that we need to ask or we need to be thinking about in this industry is not the if, but the when. When we're compromised or when we leak data. Because I hate to say it, but there's no such thing as a 100% secure environment. We're never always going to be secure to the point that we're not ever leaking data or we're not ever having a compromise that's going to attack or an attack's not going to happen to us. Even the ma and pa coffee shops have to be worried about this. Everybody is a potential attack target. Not necessarily because we want to get any data off of them, but because we could use them to launch other potential attacks. So the question really becomes now, when we are compromised, how do we recover? How do we save face in this industry? How do we make it so that we don't lose trust with our end users? How do we get to the point that we don't lose trust with upper management? And then how do we look for that inspection, or how do we do that forensic analysis to determine where were we compromised, how can we try to prevent this from happening in the future, understanding that there still is most likely that risk and we're going to have to work through this. So we need to look at this and change the discussion from if to when. Get used to understanding that you will be compromised, and how do we work away from that? Because this is our new norm right here. Those of you that don't know this site, you should know this site. I introduced this to a few of the students in the boot camp this weekend. It's haveibeenpwned.com. That's set up by Troy Hunt. Troy's a well-known security blogger and security expert and consultant in the industry, and he does a lot of speaking. And he goes out and he finds all the hashes, or not all the hashes, excuse me, all the dumps and all the bins that has all of our data that was leaked when somebody compromises a website. When they compromise and pull up all the information from the database, he takes that and uploads it so you can subscribe, so you can get lovely emails in your inbox that says, your information has been stolen and here's what was stolen. Here's what was at risk. This is our norm now. our norm is that we are going to see these emails come in. Our data is out there that everybody wants to have access to it. And you might think about something like Facebook or Twitter, and you look at it and say, well, who the heck cares if they compromise my Facebook, my Twitter account? How many of you share the passwords across applications? You know, passwords, those complex. We don't want to have to remember 10 different passwords. We just want to remember one password. Well, the thing that people care about with this is they care about the hashes. They care about that password to the hash masking so that they can go and try to use that hash with your username and password on somebody else's website, i.e. your bank or travel. A huge target lately is airline miles. People are going after your air miles accounts so that they can try to get all the miles out of there because miles are worth money to some people. I don't know. I fly 125 plus thousand miles a year, not as much as Keith does, but I'm up there. And I look at my miles and I'm like, I don't want to get on an airplane for vacation, so they're almost worthless to me other than upgrades. But people are looking at these. So they worry about getting all this data to try to figure out other ways that we can compromise on other sites that have more important aspects of it that they're going to look for. So that's the new norm. The new norm is getting those emails, getting those notifications. So we're at a wireless conference, so we should probably talk about security as it relates to wireless. That's really what you guys would rather hear about, right? You'd rather hear about how wireless security works. So I want to ask this question real quick. Is wireless secure? As an ECSE instructor, one of our slides that I sometimes have a hard time going over is the fact when we compare wired and wireless networks. And one of the last aspects of it is that we say wired networks are secure and wireless networks are not secure. We have this notion in there that wireless is just completely insecure. It's an unbounded medium. We can't bound the medium. We can't put cuffs on the RF to say, you don't go outside of these walls or wherever they're going to go for. But I want to look at this in a different light. When you look at and you compare and contrast wireless and wired, what is the actual reality of this? On wireless, we use encryption. We use fairly strong encryption. We're always setting up these networks for our corporate resources with WPA2, maybe still WPA if you're kind of stuck in that one, but I can compromise that pretty fast. So hopefully it's WPA2. So we always have encryption enabled on our networks. We use authentication. Even though Rob's got his number 300 over there, it doesn't mean that I'm going to let him on my wireless network. I got trust issues, and you're an okay guy, man. Congrats on getting that, but I'm not quite sure I'm going to trust you on my wireless network. So I'm going to authenticate my wireless network to make sure that the only people that are on that are the people that I care about. Do you do that on your wired network? How many of your jacks are wide open in your wired infrastructure, in your reception rooms? Areas that are relatively easy to get access to. We try to attenuate the signal, and we try to block that signal from going everywhere. We look at it and we say, okay, when we're going to do our designs, sure, we can place that AP in a hallway and make it easier for you from a quote-unquote maintenance perspective, that if you're maintaining that AP that many times, you got other issues and you shouldn't be using that one. But we're trying to put them inside a room so that we can shrink down the cell sizes and control where that RF goes. We're trying to put those cuffs on that unbounded medium. So we try to do all this, and we try to figure out all these ways of being able to protect ourselves, and we put all these authentications and encryptions in place. Doesn't that mean wireless is secure? At that point in time, haven't we secured wireless in most of your environments way more than you've secured your wired environment? Most of the customers that I walk into, the answer to that is yes. We've took the time to figure out how do we secure and ensure that the only people on our wireless networks are the ones that we actually want on there. Some countries over in European areas, for example, they'll even go as far as making sure that the guest network is secure by putting preshared keys on all of it, and you have to look through the menu or look on a chalkboard behind a bar or sign somewhere to find that preshared key to get onto the network. So wireless really is a secure medium. We take the time and we make the effort to secure that, unlike what we do with our wired counterparts. However, where there is a will, there is a way. This actually is a true picture. So this is off of the border down in Texas. And we're doing this great job of making this wall to separate us from that country down south to us, our friends in Mexico. And we're trying to make ourselves have a strong border and be really secure, super secure, make sure that you check all your IDs and everything. But there's always going to be somebody that's going to try to figure out how in the heck can I get around this thing. You know, we put walls into place. People put walls in front of us in terms of our career, and what do? We figure out how we can get around that wall. We want to know how we can better ourselves and make that happen. So these clever drug runners decided that they would, instead of going through the plazas, through the actual access control areas, they looked at that wall and said, "Challenge accepted, hold my beer and watch this." And if you look closely, it actually looks like they used a couple of ladders. Now, I'm pretty handy. I do a lot of work around the house, and may or may not have fallen off a few ladders at some point in time in my life, bringing sheetrock up and everything. If you're not aware of this, ladders have a certain weight restriction on them, and it's you plus the materials, and they kind of bounce against the house, and you know, they're kind of dangerous to go on. So these folks, they decided we can just go over this wall. We're gonna take the shortest path we possibly can, and we're gonna go up and we're gonna go over the wall. Well, unfortunately, they forgot just how things work and how you have to look at your angles of approach as you're going over things. I used to do 4x4 into my Jeep in Colorado. Everything was always about the approach angles. And they got themselves hide-centered on top of this wall, and then we're seen fleeing by foot back into Mexico so that they could not ultimately get their drugs over this. Our users, or the people that are doing the compromise, and I try not to use the word hacker because I consider myself a hacker because I like to mess around with stuff and try to break into my own stuff. So everybody that was trying to compromise our network, you know, they're going to find a way to get in. No matter what we do, they're going to find a way. We can do everything we possibly can, but somebody's going to find something out. There's weaknesses in everything. It's sad but true. We look at all of our release notes, and basically today when we do wireless deployments, when we start reading through the release notes, we're like, which bug can I live with and which bug can I not live with? You know, that's what we have to work through when we go through on this. So let's kind of talk about some of the risks that we have inside of wireless networking and maybe talk about how we can kind of work through some of this. So the first one I want to talk about is the whole near or far. Do we care about the person that's in the parking lot? You know, a lot of times my customers will ask me and they'll say, "Why are you placing the access points around the perimeter of our buildings? Aren't you wasting a majority of your signal out into the parking lot where we don't want coverage? Oh, and also, by the way, if you're going out in the parking lot, I got to worry about that guy sitting inside of their car." But the fact of the matter is, we don't have to worry about the person sitting in the car. I mean, we do, ultimately, in the end, but I'm more worried about that person that builds an antenna out of a Pringles can. Yes, did that back in college. It's just simple, you know, you toss the Pringles. I don't know anybody that actually likes Pringles. I certainly don't. So I just toss the Pringles and then put all thread down it and set some washers at the right distance to be able to create the wavelengths. And now I've got a nice little Yagi antenna for relatively cheap, because I was cheap in college, let's be honest, eating ramen and macaroni and cheese. So now I've got this Yagi antenna that I'm shooting down the street a few blocks from my apartment. I would set it on top of my little TV that I had in our window, and I would shoot down the street, and it would be pointed towards the wireless network. And at this point in time, now I can capture the four-way handshake. I can sit there and try to capture and do a lot of forensics and try to figure out what's going on in this network, and then start running those through the hash program to try to figure out, can I compromise these pre-shared keys? Or if I get a bunch of .1x hashes, can I run it against a rainbow table? Can I do something with this to try to figure out what these credentials are? Because then once I actually figured out what the pre-shared key is, my next stop is I'm actually going to go close to the facility now and try to do something else, like interject packets or whatever. So we look at this as, do we care about the person that is right in our parking lot or the person that is far away? Because it doesn't take much for us to put a Yagi on our end of it, on the attacker's side of it, to be able to pluck frames out of the air. I don't care if you can hear me. You know, I want you all to hear me right now, so I'm making sure that I'm transmitting loud enough and we have the microphones working so that we can actually hear everything. But I could just sit back and I could just listen. You know, right now, everybody in this room is just sitting back and listening. You're receiving. It doesn't matter if I can hear you back right now. I just need to capture those frames. So when we had the discussion about should we place the access points next to the edge, or what can we do from a transmit power, or how can we control from the edge, it's not necessarily that big of a deal because we have to be more worried about the person that is far away from us that we can't even see, that we don't even know that they're doing this. Because then when they do come back ultimately, that's when we start to have the concerns. Because once they return to us, most likely they're returning because they've already compromised your pre-shared key, or they've already found some hashes that they can actually use and get onto your network with. So now they're important. But at the first go-around, the near issue is not a big deal. Where else do we have a concern on this? So the other aspect is man in the middle. Wireless, because it's broadcast and how it works, it's just spray and pray, right? We put all the signal on and we hope that it goes where we want it to go, and unfortunately it goes where we don't want it to go, so that creates design headaches. But all this signal is going out everywhere, every which direction from our radiant elements. So when we look at the man in the middle attack, now we have to take into consideration how can somebody intercept that and be in line on my communications, and what can they do with it? So there's a company out there, Hack5, that makes a lot of really easy devices to do. I'm actually wearing one right now. No, I'm not man in the middle attacking anybody. I actually tried to get one of my things to go up and just rickroll all of you so that somebody would be looking at the Wi-Fi analyzer and see what the SSIDs were, but it didn't launch in time. But relatively small device that I can just carry on my hip with a battery here. And what it can do is it can capture and see, okay, what are the networks that you guys are probing for? What are the networks that you're looking for? And I can run karma on it. And I can say, yeah, I'll be Wi-Fi tracked for you. If that's the network that you want, I'll be that network. I'll let you connect to me. And then once you're connected to me, now I'm in between all of your transactions, all of your frame transmissions. So what can I do with that at this point in time? Well, I could be funny, and I could say, hey, Rob, I'm sorry, but I'm going to replace every single picture that you're looking at on the internet with a cat. Because after all, the internet is for cats and cat videos, right? That's what everybody uses it for. Or I could say, I'm going to make it so that, Scott, you're going to have to stand on your head and read this because I'm going to flip all of the text upside down on you. Now, those might seem like stupid little parlor tricks, but that's what the point of this device is to prove how easy all of this is to do. Then you have to start worrying about the large-scale attacks where somebody is now using, and they're using this as a pivot box, and they're sending all the frames over to something like Metasploit, and I start running SSL strip on it, and I'm trying to actually decrypt your SSL traffic so I can maybe get into your banking information. Or I can get into James's email and find out what's coming in the next couple of updates out there. You know, I can go through and I can try to figure out what's the target-rich environment that I want to look at and run it against through that Metasploit and do more things that actually matter to us other than just silly little script kiddie actions. So we have to worry about that man-in-the-middle attack and try to figure out how can we make sure that we are secure enough to prevent that and not see those on our networks. The next one that we have to worry about. How many of you have password policies at your organization that just make you want to slam your forehead onto the desk every single time that you get the notification that says, your password is going to expire in 5 days. You must now create a new complex passphrase. So users, let's be honest, users, they're the evil that we have to support. They're the layer 8 that we look at it and we just say, oh man, what are they going to do to us now today? So we go and we give them a complex passphrase in order to get on the network. And they can't remember it, so what do? They write it on a Post-note and they put it on their monitor. Or even worse, they decide that they're going to go and they're going to interview the Network Operations Center for, I don't know, a large sporting event like a Super Bowl or something. And you got all these news cameras in there, and then right there in the background on the whiteboard, there's the pre-shared key for the internal network. And you're just like, really, guys? This is why we can't have nice things. So we have to worry about this complex password issue, because if I provide a complex password, which is going to make it so that Blake can't run Cowpadder or Blake can't run Aircrack NG against it and get that pre-shared key easily, do I just open myself up to social attacks now? Where it's just going to be easier for me to go and say, call up and get somebody on the help desk and be like, yeah, I'm trying to get onto the network. I'm a new employee or a new contractor here. Or I can't remember what the key was. I thought it was this, and it's not working. And then they might just say, okay, here's the pre-shared key. If we overcomplicate things, it ends up being where we start introducing more holes and more risks because of the overcomplex nature of this. So complex passwords, believe it or not, are actually one of our problems. When you look at a pre-shared key and you understand how the PSK from the passphrase to the PSK mapping happens, just doing something as simple as welcome and the number 1 at the end of it is secure and robust and is going to take me a long time to compromise. It's not just a straight dictionary word. Simple things, simple actions will make sure that our networks can't be compromised through the pre-shared key aspect of it. We don't need 63 characters, fully random, symbols, all this stuff. It would make more sense to not have a complex random pre-shared key, but put something like, this is how I get in my network, exclamation point. Because the end user is going to completely understand that. But an attack against that, we have enough entropy through there that it's going to be hard for them to be able to run through that. You know, it might take them a year, but at least hopefully you're changing your pre-shared keys once every year, which I know is not happening, but you know, it gives us the warm and fuzzies, right? We try to do that. So the next aspect of this actually was kind of funny is this happened this morning. So as I'm sitting here this morning and we're listening to Tom give the really cool history about wireless and the CWNP program and where everything came from, all of a sudden on my screen on my iPad pops up, hey, would you like to share the password with JD? Because JD's sitting there trying to log into the wireless network and he needs a pre-shared key. And JD is a contact of mine. So iOS is like, well, why don't you help, be helpful, get him on the network. Let's just share this password over to him. So the issue that we see with this is we go to the companies all the time and they say, oh yeah, IT is the only one that knows that pre-shared key. Nobody other than these 4 people know this pre-shared key because they're the only ones that set up the computers. Cool. That was great until this magical thing that Bender really enjoys called the cloud came around. And we started doing all this cloud backup, cloud sync, make your life easier, make us not have to remember anything anymore because everything is going to go up to the cloud and then it's going to go down to all of your devices that are connected to that account as well. Well, one of the things that could happen, for example, in a MacBook or an iPhone situation, if you have iCloud Sync enabled, is that your pre-shared key is going to go from your MacBook up into your iDevice, up into your iPad or your iPhone. At that point in time, if any one of your contacts tries to start typing in a password for Wi-Fi Trek, which was the case this morning, I'm going to get a prompt and say, you know what, one of your contacts would like to connect to this network. Would you like to share the password with them? And there's some black magic that's going to go on here, and they're going to somewhat encrypt this and send this pre-shared key over. Well, now their pre-shared key is on that person's device. Now that's on that person's device, so then that's going to sync down to their laptop, for example. And then we start running into issues of now that laptop has that on, which then I could go and I could grab this little device, which is a bash bunny, and I can load a payload onto here, and this payload is going to go and it's going to query for all of the known networks and all the pre-shared keys that are on somebody's laptop. And oh, by the way, this will work when your laptop is locked as well if you're a Windows user. So I can just plug this in and I can get all that information, and now I have your pre-shared key. So if I got your pre-shared key, then I could configure this other device on my hip here to now start broadcasting that SSID that you would like with the pre-shared key that you've already configured, and I know what it is. So now you're going to think that you're in an encrypted conversation, but I'm the person in the middle. And I can now get everything, and I can do whatever I would like to and interject frames if I'd want to and change things around. So this electronic sharing of pre-shared keys is taking away the fact that IT is the only ones that know the passphrase because they're the only ones that set up these computers, and nobody else is ever informed of what this is. So we've got a new threat vector that we have to watch out for that is trying to make our lives easier so that we don't have to do this whole typing in passwords anymore. Oopsie, I think I went too fast there. Technology is great. I'm really good at this, I promise. So the last one I want to talk about again is the credential theft, is just the fact that I could walk up into that lobby and look at a receptionist computer and see if they're plugged into the network. Or if they're plugged into a network, I have another device, it's called a LAN turtle, but this is wireless, so we want to talk about wireless attacks. So in that one, if it is wireless, again, I can plug in this bash bunny and I can pull all that credential information off of there and steal all the credentials and know what their pre-shared keys are, know what their certificates are possibly. Lots of fun stuff that I can do with this and capture all that payload, and I just grab that. Again, it usually takes about 30 seconds to 60 seconds, depending on how much information that you want to take off of that machine. So I have all that information. Now I'm going to leave because I'm going to go and try to figure out what is it that I can do with this. Once I know what I can do with this, then I'm going to come back and actually do more of a directed attack at somebody by, again, configuring a pineapple, for example, or just trying to use those credentials that I found just to get onto the network, and then once I'm on the network, I'm gonna start poking around, run some Nmap, and hope I'm not caught by your wired IDS, excuse me, and make sure that you can't detect that I'm doing that. But I'm gonna try to find something, and I'm gonna look for those servers and see what I can get into. So all these tools, these things are extremely easy to do. You know, I love Hack5 for creating these tools, but I also hate Hack5 for creating these tools because what it does is it puts this tool in the hands of people that don't necessarily even know what it is that they can do with all of this, and there's a whole lot of havoc that they can cause with these little tools and these little devices. Okay, so the risks, those are the risks. Now the question is, can we actually be safe? I've said all of this stuff, so can we actually be safe now? Is there anything that we can do to actually make ourselves be safe, be able to have wireless that exists, and not have to worry about what's going to go on in the environment? Sure, there's a few things that we can do. We can go to the ultimate extremes here. We could create a Faraday cage around our entire facility. I've been in one facility that actually did do this, and of course I was kind of being a little bit cocky because I was younger, and we always say that we're going to do a site survey to prove that your wireless network is going outside your walls, so you should be worried about this risk, and the guy's just like, oh, don't worry about it. It's not going to go anywhere outside of our walls. We've got that covered. And I'm like, yeah, I hear that every single time. And I just start doing my survey, going around, capturing data with the Ekahau. And I go and I look at the data, and I'm like, dang, you're actually right. There is no coverage out here. What gives here? Again, I'm not really thinking about the facility that I'm surveying in. So, you know, step one, know your customers. So I'm looking at this, and the guy looks at me and goes, you know, what building are you in right now? I'm like, I don't know. What, man? So he's like, think about this. You're in the power control station for the entire southeastern part of Minnesota and the western regions of Wisconsin. This was the power control station for one of the nuclear power plants that was down in the area. He's like, we're shielded from an EMP blast. Nothing in also means nothing out. So they were fully secure. They spent the money to be able to make sure that their building was essentially an entire massive Faraday cage. So yes, they were secure, and there was a lot of people that would make sure that they were checking the IDs of who you were, and there were some folks with some really cool-looking guns that GT would love to play with, I'm sure, and Devin as well. And I'm looking at this as we're going up, and I'm like, okay, physical security, check. RF security, yes, you did meet that requirement because you built a Faraday cage around your building. Not everybody's going to do that. So then the other option is that RF paint. You guys want to run down to Home Depot and get some RF paint and see if we can make RF shield around this environment? Your mileage is going to vary with that thing, okay? That's more of a, yeah, maybe it's going to do this, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know of anybody that's actually used this and it's worked. So the Faraday cage is kind of the ultimate fix that we have to work with. But not everybody's going to do those ultimate fixes. Every now and then we have to look at what are the other options that we have go through there. So why don't we change the lock? Why don't we come up with a smarter lock? Does anybody know what the critical flaw with this lock is right here? The designer of this lock said, this is the most secure lock out there, unless you have a screwdriver in your possession. I kid you not. It was found out that you could just open this thing up with a screwdriver and it would unlock. You could pull the tumbler right out and you could open this lock up. So then they changed their line to say, well, yeah, but who carries a screwdriver around with them? Right, Jason? I mean, however many times we get them take away from TSA, we might still have one or may not have one, but. So we want to try to change our lock in terms of what we do from a wireless connectivity and a wireless security standpoint. Look at your pre-shared key. Lots of vendors these days have an identity PSK solution. Mist is here that has one. Arrowhive is here that has one. A lot of vendors have the ability to do an identity PSK. It makes more sense to do multiple PSKs and have a PSK that is assigned to a user that user can then use on their devices. Because if I compromise Scott's PSK, that only gets me into his devices. I've been on his devices. There's nothing of interest in there. I don't need to look at anything of that. But I might want to get on somebody else's. So now I actually have to do more of a directed attack to try to figure out this. Whereas before, it was just all about looking at a MAC address and saying, well, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a tiger, but oh, you're my target, and I'm going to go after you. I just looked at seeing who was doing the most frames, who was sending the most frames, because I would assume they're the ones that are going to provide something because they've got all the data that's going through there. Change to .1x. You know, .1x is by far the best way that we should do our security. PSK is a management nightmare for most folks, but .1x is relatively easy to do, and the vendors, talk to Aruba and talk to them about ClearPass, Our vendors are making it so much easier for us to do .1x security. There's no real reason why we don't do this other than just the fact that people tell us what we should provide to them when they don't understand how the technology actually works. But when you are doing .1x, ensure that you are using a tunneled EAP protocol. We're not obviously going to go out and use EAP MD5. Even EAP-TLS is somewhat of a concern because it's still outside of a tunneled protocol. You want to use something like EAP-PEEP with EAP-TLS inside of that, or use EAP-TTLS, so we have a tunneled protocol where we are sending our username, or we're sending our certificate, whatever credentials that we're using, we're sending inside of a secure tunnel, so that if there is Blake sitting out there with his Pringles can and trying to sniff the frames, he's not really going to get a whole heck of a lot. He's going to get a bunch of encrypted frames that he has to break the encryption on just to be able to get the things I care about. And if I'm going to go for that, I'm going to go find somebody else that's easier to compromise, so I'm not going to do that. Now, the last one that I know that Perry is going to talk about this week, so I didn't want to go too much into this. I didn't want to waste a ton of my time on it because Perry's going to do a lot better job at it than I would do on it, but it's WPA3. So when we look at WPA3, well, what's that going to end up providing for us? What do we get out of WPA3? So WPA3 is finally becoming to see the light of day. We're getting close to where this is actually going to be out in the market. We saw this morning that we've got now a network here that has WPA3 running on it so that you can inspect and see what the beacons look like and everything. Well, the thing on WPA3 personal is we're trying to make it so that we can prevent some of these attacks from happening because we're strengthening that PSK process. We're moving away from just the typical PSK that we know today and understand, and those of you that attended my boot camp, we all know and understand how that works, right guys? Nod your heads, yes, make me feel good about myself. We're going to switch to simultaneous authentications of equals, where now this is more of a kind of like a blind trust in a way where we're both going to compute things, we're both going to compute parts of the hash and work together to come up with what our final authentication keys look like based off of an elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman exchange. And again, I said Perry's going to be talking about, Perry, you going to show that video again in your talk? Right, that you showed in Prague, hopefully, so the people will be able to see this exchange and understand what's going on this. So this is the goal behind this is, can we be resilient to an offline dictionary attack? If we do get compromised where somebody captures our frames, does it matter at that point in time? We're not going to be able to go through and run that against a dictionary attack to try to figure out what that passphrase was. And it's going to allow us to use, hopefully, simpler passwords for our end users, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but again, complex passwords end up on the monitors. Not good from a physical security standpoint because you could be like Lord Nikon walking around and capture all these passwords. So it's going to be easier to use and provide the hope for simpler passwords so that the end users have a better experience on it. This is designed for those lower end deployments, so we want to try to shore up the security on it. Now, when we look at WPA3 Enterprise, unfortunately right now, as it sits, we're going to have the exact same as WPA2, but the goal is that we're going to have MFP required. We all tried MFP. Remember, we had some issues with management frame protection when it first came out. Windows 7, big, huge issue, caused a lot of pain for quite a few universities, and it was not fun to go through. However, we have an optional 192-bit mode, which is going to shore up the encryption now. So we can strengthen the encryption suites that we're using, go to a 256-bit stronger encryption. Again, we're going to use that elliptic curve on the Diffie-Hellman to try to be able to create a more robust security network than what we already have. This, however, like I said, is optional though, so it'll be interesting to see what actually happens in terms of adoption from not only vendors but also client devices. Because they could just look at it and say, you know what, we're going to do the bare minimum for the WPA3 and we're going to give you management frame protection, which is a plus, yes, we like, but we would much rather also have the higher end encryption as well being used for these. So again, interesting to see what happens on there. Enhanced open is the other one that's out there, open but encrypted. This is not part of WPA3 though. So do understand this, is that WPA3 does not mean that we're doing enhanced opening. This is an optional element that you can also do in addition to supporting WPA3 out there. When we look at the enhanced open, the benefit behind this is that we're going to use opportunistic wireless encryption. We're going to try to figure out a way to be able to do encryption without the issues of pre-shared keys and everything. And the idea behind here is that, again, it's a Diffie-Hellman exchange. There's no authentication. The downside here is, though, we're going to have a second BSS. We all know that multiple SSIDs is bad, right? We keep trying to get rid of SSIDs, so now we're bringing in another SSID from a transitional standpoint, so that what's going to happen is if your client supports OWE or if it supports enhanced open, as the Wi-Fi Alliance term is out there, what will go on is that inside of the beacon, the client will be able to receive additional information elements that says, oh, by the way, there's this OWE SSID over here that you could connect to, and we could have encryption. This will be huge for hospitality and coffee shops and things like that, because again, the goal is to try to get people using encryption so that we can't just sit there and easily sniff out the frames and easily capture out the frames and do things for folks. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few months as these things start to show up and to see how the vendors start to support these, and if it's actually going to make any difference in the industry, or if we're just going to end up where it's, again, not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when things get compromised, and people are going to be quick to action on doing the compromises for these. So, are you scared yet? Do you want to go and turn off your wireless networks and not use wireless anymore? I usually have that feeling when I talk to like Ryan Adzema and Jake Snyder, because they just I look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, really, what did you just do now? You know, what did you send to my phone, or what did you configure on this that we shouldn't have gone through this? I hope it doesn't scare you too much in terms of the fact that you start to think that wireless is completely insecure, because as I started off in the beginning, wireless truly is secure. When you compare it to your wired networks in most people's environments, wireless is way more secure than the wired side. I could easily go down and find a Halloween costume that dresses up like a UPS man and walk up to the reception desk, plug in a land turtle, plug in a packet squirrel, plug in any number of devices onto a wired port, and I have a much greater chance of success, and it's going to be a lot quicker than me trying to attack over the wireless network. And a lot of times when we do pen testing activities, this is what we end up finding out, is that your wireless is truly secure. It's just somebody's scared everybody because they've said this thing like crack came out, and we should start to think that the world is ending and the sky is falling and every single consumer device in the entire face of the planet is compromisable, and oh my God, think of the children, please, would you, seriously. Even my mother is calling me and saying, do I need to turn off my router? I'm just like, no, Mom, you're good. Got you covered. It's already being updated. You're good. We have to make sure that we look at things and then we look at security in the real term. Look at it in eyes that make sense. Don't listen to everything that you see out there in terms of compromises. I strongly encourage folks to go get things like the pineapples, go get things like the bash bunnies, and see what it is that you can do with these devices. Then first, get your release of harm form signed by your employer, or simply don't attack your employer. Attack your home network maybe is even better. But if you are doing your employer, make sure that you're released of harm so that they can't come after you. And go through and try to practice some of these things and actually see how tough these are. You know, at DEF CON this year, they announced a new vulnerability in WPA2, and everybody was kind of worried. Jake and Ryan and I, we kind of looked at this and we were trying to figure out, is this even something that's possible? And when we looked through it and we started kind of running through some of the scenarios, it was still going to take us like a year or 2 years to compromise our pre-shared keys. This isn't something like WEP where I can do it in about 30 seconds and be on your network. This still takes a long time to do. So wireless is secure. Don't be afraid of it, but do understand where the risk vectors are and understand that it's not always technical. It's also just us ourselves and all the enhancements that our devices are making to try to make our lives better by sharing passwords and everything certainly doesn't do us any favors. We need to be careful about that, be mindful about that, and understand where the risks are and where our concern is. So I thank you. I hope that you enjoyed this and enjoy the rest of the conference.